Harbor of the Heart by Simon Cross. The salt-laden breeze ruffled Margaret Sinclair's skirt as she walked along the cobblestone streets of Millhaven, Massachusetts. At age 25, she had established herself as a respected instructor at a ladies' seminary in Boston, but returning to her seaside home stirred memories as vast as the Atlantic itself. 7 years had passed since she'd left this fishing village, carrying dreams that stretched beyond its rocky shores. As she rounded the corner onto Water Street, her heart nearly stilled. There, before the chandlery, stood Benjamin Whitman, her childhood sweetheart. His capable hands were arranging barrels of whale oil, while his familiar profile spoke of quiet strength earned from years at sea. Time seemed to pause as Benjamin looked up, his storm-gray eyes widening with recognition. "Miss Sinclair?" he called out, quickly removing his cap. "Can it truly be you?" Margaret felt warmth rise to her cheeks as she approached, suddenly conscious of her fashionable Boston walking dress. "Mr. Whitman," she replied with a small nod, feeling rather like the young girl who had once watched for his father's whaling ship from the Widow's Walk. "It has been quite some time." Benjamin's smile was as steady as the lighthouse beam, though now accompanied by the quiet confidence that years as a successful merchant had given him. 7 years this September," he said. "You're looking well. What brings you back to Millhaven?" "My parents' 40th wedding anniversary," Margaret explained. "We're planning a celebration at the Congregational Church this Sunday." As they conversed, catching up on the years between them, Margaret couldn't help but notice how naturally they fell into conversation. Benjamin spoke of taking over the chandlery after his father retired from the sea, his position on the Merchant Marine Board, and his work expanding trade routes to New York. Margaret shared tales of her life in Boston, her students at the seminary, and the literary circles she frequented. "Miss Sinclair," Benjamin said, consulting his brass pocket watch, "I'm about to close shop for the afternoon meal. Might I escort you to Hawthorne's tea room? For old time's sake?" Margaret hesitated. She had promised to assist her sister with the anniversary preparations, but looking into Benjamin's hopeful expression, she found herself accepting. That would be most kind. They walked to Hawthorne's, the same establishment where they had shared hot chocolate and conversation in their youth. As they settled at a window table overlooking the harbor, Margaret was struck by how little had changed. The same Nantucket whaling prints on the walls, the same delicate china cups, even old Mrs. Hawthorne herself, though her cap now covered silver hair. Over tea and fresh-baked molasses cookies they shared deeper confidences. She learned that he had nearly married 4 years prior, but his intended had chosen a gentleman from Philadelphia instead. He'd since devoted himself to the family business and establishing new trade routes. Margaret spoke of her own brief courtships in Boston, none of which had stirred her heart like her memories of Benjamin. As the afternoon light began to fade, Benjamin asked, "Do you recall our walks along Lighthouse Point?" Margaret smiled, remembering. "How could I forget? We spent countless Sunday afternoons there after services, watching the ships and dreaming of the future. Would you care to walk there now? The asters are in full bloom along the cliffs." Propriety suggested she should return to her family's home on Maple Street, but something stronger drew her to accept. "I would enjoy that very much." The path to Lighthouse Point was weathered by salt spray, but as they emerged onto the headland, the sight of the endless ocean and rocky coast took Margaret's breath away. It was exactly as she remembered. They found their favorite spot near the lighthouse keeper's cottage, maintaining a proper distance as they sat upon a weather-worn bench. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of coral and lavender, while fishing boats made their way home to harbor. "I've thought of you often," Benjamin said softly. "Wondered if the city provided all you hoped to find." Margaret turned to look at him, her heart quickening. "Mr. Whitman." "Please," he said gently, "call me Benjamin as you once did." "Benjamin," she began anew, "I know you've built a life here, while I have my position at the seminary." "Millhaven has grown," he said. "The Merchant Marine Board has approved funds for a proper academy to educate the children of sea captains and merchants. We're in need of someone with experience to serve as headmistress." He paused, watching her carefully. "Someone who understands both city refinement and coastal life." Margaret felt tears well up in her eyes. "I have missed this place," she admitted. "The sound of the waves, the smell of salt air, the way the fog rolls in like a living thing." As the first stars appeared above the darkening ocean, they spoke of possibilities. They remembered the Founder's Day dance where they'd first waltzed together, laughed about the time Benjamin's sloop had run aground in the harbor mud, and shared their hopes for Millhaven's future. When the evening chill suggested they return, Benjamin offered his arm, which Margaret accepted with a smile. Their walk back through town was filled with meaningful glances and unspoken promises. At the gate of her family's federal-style home, they paused. The moment was rich with possibility. "Miss Sinclair," Benjamin said, his voice gentle but sure, "might I call upon you tomorrow? Perhaps you would allow me to escort you to your parents' anniversary celebration?" Margaret felt warmth bloom in her chest despite the evening sea breeze. The thought of returning to Boston suddenly seemed as distant as the horizon. "I would like that very much," she said softly. Then, gathering her courage, she added, "And perhaps we might discuss what the future could hold here in Millhaven." Benjamin's face brightened like the morning sun on calm waters. "Are you saying?" "I'm saying that perhaps it's time I came home," Margaret replied. The new academy would benefit from an experienced teacher, would it not? As they stood there beneath the gas lamps of Maple Street, Margaret marveled at life's unexpected turns. She had returned to Millhaven thinking it a brief visit home. Instead, she found herself contemplating a future she had never dared imagine, one that felt both thrilling and perfectly right. That night, as Margaret sat at her bedroom window, watching the lighthouse beam sweep across the harbor, she knew that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't have anticipated when she'd arrived on the morning stage mere hours ago. The love of their youth had never truly faded. Now, with the wisdom of years and the courage to embrace second chances, that love was blossoming into something deeper, stronger, and more enduring than the granite foundations of Millhaven itself. As she prepared for bed, her heart full and her mind awhirl with possibilities, Margaret realized that sometimes the grandest adventures don't come from seeking new horizons, but from rediscovering what was always meant to be. Her journey had brought her full circle. Back to Millhaven, back to Benjamin, and back to a love that had withstood the test of time. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: this time Margaret and Benjamin would face it together, their love stronger for having been tested by time and tide, ready to write the next chapter of their story in the town that had always been their harbor of the heart.